a glass to the past, and the ladies cross the ages, fallen fathers from the motherland whose lives are on the pages. And the bard who said it best when he told us all the world's a stage. So fellas, grab a glass and lift your spirits to the seventh age.
Welcome one and all to the Seven Ages Audio Journal. It's time once again to pour up a glass and to pull up a chair as we gather together right here in our very favorite corner of the Cross-Time Pub, probing the mysteries of temporal and spatial relationships between ancient earthen sites and singing stones that occupy very close proximities. And as always, we are your hosts. I'm Micah Hanks. He is Jason Pentrail. That fella is James Waldo, geologist extraordinaire. And together we are the three amigos, in search of singing stones, singing bushes, and occasionally also maybe a invisible horseman. Swordsman, I mean. Jason, how are you, my boy?
I am good indeed, and happy Archaeology Month to you both. It is that time of year once again.
Yes, it is. It snuck up on us. I guess last year I kind of missed it. We had a little bit of rainfall up here in Appalachia. James, how's it going over there, over in Rock Country?
It's going pretty well, Micah. It's good to talk to you guys again.
Well, that's fantastic. Good to talk to both of you guys as well. You know, recently I made my way over to Music City. I'll tell you, there's Los Angeles, there's New York, there's Seattle, there's Dallas. I mean, there are so many cities, but there's nothing quite like Printer's Alley on a Saturday night in downtown Nashville, Tennessee. But after visiting the city and having a little of the city life there in Nashville for a day or so, on my way home I decided to go a little off the beaten path, and I dropped by what's known as Sellers Farm State Archaeological Area, which is just outside, maybe about 45 minutes outside of Nashville proper. Are either of you familiar with this site?
I've heard the name, but I've never really did a deep dive on it, know much about it.
Yeah, this one was unknown to me too, and I just happened to be on the road. It was a beautiful Sunday morning, and I was like, I'm just going to check out some archaeology in the area. And, there are some archaeological sites right in Nashville proper, but those, unfortunately, are a lot of the time kind of out of the way on public land, or the actual archaeological items of significance have been removed and taken to museums in fairly distant cities. So I wanted to go to an actual site if one were available, and sure enough, coming back from Nashville, there's Sellers Farm, which is just a little way off the main highway as you're coming out of Nashville. In fact, I've got a little information here about the site, and I'll describe to you what it was like getting down there for this brief foray I made to an ancient Mississippian site. But according to the state archaeological data made available there on location, it's described as one of the best preserved Native American villages in the Southeast, and this site, they say, is known today, of course, as Sellers Farm State Archaeological Area. They say the settlement was occupied from about AD 1000 until AD 1300, and the village was in the bend of a big creek, and so to get down to it, you actually park your car, and you have to take a little nature hike down a road that takes you out to a wide open field, and initially I didn't actually see the archaeological site itself. You just kind of see a big field. So I keep walking along, and eventually coming around the edge of some trees, I see the mound off in the distance. It's quite overgrown, and it's easy to see why I missed it from the initial perspective I had of the wide field. The closer you get to it, and again, I think a lot of people who probably don't have experience visiting archaeological sites, it's overgrown enough that they would probably think, oh, there's a really funny hill sitting over there, some kind of a mound. But indeed, it's not unlike other earthen mounds that we've visited, except it's, again, more overgrown, and so it looks a little more in its natural state, we'll say. As the state marker there reads, the creek provided natural defense against enemies and also produced food such as fish, freshwater mussels, and the shells of which were used and crushed to temper pottery. Apparently, there was quite a lot that was recovered from this location, including some very characteristic Mississippian period sculptures and things along those lines. But it was really cool to get out there and see this one, because I hadn't even been aware of Sellers Farm prior to just randomly finding it on the map and saying, I'm going to pop over here and take a look. So not much of a site report, but I did take some photographs. And Jason, I meant to send those to you. I think they only made their way to James. I was out there in a field thinking I was texting both of you, and I think I had a one-way line open with the geologist, so I'll have to send you some images, Jason.
Having just gotten back from Kentucky, West Virginia, Ohio myself, many of the sites that I visited were in that same state. a condition that is a little bit overgrown. But I will say that most of the ones that we visited, 35 sites in 5 days, most of them were very well maintained and cared for, had good signage, good interpretation. So that was nice to see. However, one thing that was quite shocking was so many of the sites that I've read about my whole life, and you've read these archaeological reports and you've seen these photographs your whole entire life. When you actually go see them, they are not at all what you expect, just because the surrounding area kind of throws off the vibe, if you will. So many of these sites are taken from an aerial photo or from just the right angle. But when you actually get there, you find out that it's right in the middle of a neighborhood, that there's literally kids playing on top of it and riding their bikes down the other side while you're taking photographs. So many of them are in a very urban area. Of course, as urban sprawl happens, these cities move out further into the country and kind of overtake these areas. But many of them were just surrounded by highways, by roads, by neighborhoods, by playground equipment in some cases. So again, when you get out there and you see it for yourself, it's not always how you envision it, but at least they were being taken care of and they were being maintained. So most of them were mowed and trimmed and kept free of trees and overall in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I mean, it takes an awful lot to preserve ancient sites, and really virtually anything from the ancient world. That especially applies when we're talking about ancient human remains. And that's one reason why a particular study that has come out recently is so intriguing. A digital reconstruction, as I understand it, of a estimated to be 1 million year old human skull is now reshaping what we think we know about human beginnings. The official name of this, and I'm sure you've probably seen this story because it's gotten a lot of attention recently, Yunjian 2. It's believed to be about 1 million years old, and of course, that's going to make that a lot different from anatomically modern humans. But the intriguing aspect about this is that what it seems to suggest is that ancient human lineages that led to modern humans may have existed close to 500,000 years earlier than previously expected. And so the Yunjian 2 skull, first discovered in Hubei province, China, back in 1990, I mean, it was initially mistaken for having belonged to an entirely different species, Homo erectus. But again, based on new technological advancements, including that digital reconstruction, which helps to take the slightly misshapen skull in its current fossilized shape and to rectify its appearance, and thereby revealing, oh, it isn't really so much a robust hominid like it kind of looked to be initially. It is indeed more morphologically similar to modern humans than things that we knew to have existed at that time. Indeed, that was a real surprise, and partially because there is a rather controversial idea in anthropology that human origins may have independently developed in different locations, or that in the ancient world there might have been an exit out of Africa at a much earlier period, and that there may have been humans that came back or that actually met with the ones that are known to have left Africa on the currently accepted timeline. So again, what this seems to show is there are some unusual discoveries right now that are not only pushing the timescales back on early humans, but also potentially also expanding the areas where they may have inhabited and essentially extending that entire human story back to much further periods than what we thought could have been possible. This is a really exciting discovery, but it's understandable why it's a bit controversial still, and I think this is a developing story, and we'll have to eventually see, really with all of the ongoing information we are finding, not only about anatomically modern humans in the ancient world, but of course also the Denisovans. We're finding a lot of new information about Denisovans, and intriguingly, all essentially almost in quick succession after a few pretty notable breakthroughs. Blood protein analysis, for instance, that helps to confirm anomalous cranial fossils that, again, now we know to have actually belonged to Denisovans. We had quite a few samples of Neanderthals, but again, we're still learning things about Neanderthals, their dispersal, where the most recent existing Neanderthals would have thrived. And so as we learn all these things, this is such an exciting time for anthropology, but it's also going to raise a whole lot of questions and probably blow a few minds along the way, I would gather.
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting development, honestly, and it kind of pushes that timeline for modern humans and Neanderthals split off from that common ancestor, which is what we've been talking about, even further back. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's going to be, eventually found to be even further back than that. And, while we're talking about Neanderthals a little bit, I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about this for a while. And, Neanderthals, eventually went extinct, and nobody really knows why. But, I think there's a pretty good possibility that they basically just got absorbed into modern humans.
Oh yeah, of course.
Just interbred to the point that they were basically indistinct from modern humans. They got absorbed genetically into our group.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think that's pretty much where people's heads are. So I think you're right about that. And I also think that although we can certainly recognize that they were a separate species and that after a certain period they no longer existed, we also find evidence of hybrid remains that seem to indicate past interbreeding between humans and Neanderthals, some pretty compelling data about that. But I think the most important thing, too, is that even modern human populations still possess remnant DNA from Neanderthals and Denisovans. And that had been one of the great mysteries about some of the recently confirmed Denisovan fossil discoveries. In places like Southeast Asia, there's an abundance of genetic material in modern populations that is inherited from Denisovans and those ancient interbreeding experiences. And yet we didn't find very many fossils, and anthropologists were a little perplexed by that for a time, but then we had these anomalous fossils like Penghu 1 and others that began turning up, yet again referring to that blood protein analysis where we couldn't extract DNA and we couldn't actually sequence the genome to determine what these fossils represented. Blood protein analysis has helped us to clear that up. We now know that many of these fossils belong to the Denisovans, and indeed, they persisted not only in those same areas where the genetic heritage is still evident today, but intriguingly, there is some indication that they may have been around a lot more recently than we would have expected. And that also really intrigues me because we also have to ask questions about how more recently than what the fossil record seems to indicate might some of those Denisovans and the Neanderthals as well have persisted. I mean, so many questions. And again, I think there are going to be some discoveries in the years ahead that could really blow wide open everything we thought we knew about the world of the Pleistocene. So again, I'm really excited to see discoveries like this. And another one that was really intriguing too, you may have seen, involves a 5,000-year-old Spanish tomb that researchers are saying has really shown some very intriguing things about the ancient world. Dolmen 1 is what this tomb is known as. It's in the area of Andalusia in Spain. And the University of Cadiz is currently conducting excavations there. And they were very surprised because they found, guess what? They found shells and other things that seem to be evidence of trade with people who would have existed more along the coastal regions as opposed to where Dolmen 1 is located. Now, to me, I read this study, and although this is a big deal for a lot of archaeologists, and they are seeing this and they're saying, well, this really yet again shows how expansive the ancient world was and how much people engaged in trade and across much greater distances than we previously thought. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, but when we went up to Mound City a few years ago, we see obsidian and seashells there, and we see fossils, and we see shark teeth and all kinds of things that come from coastal regions. Some of this is indicative of trade that occurred with Mesoamerican cultural groups. Jason, in the past, you and I spoke with Robert Carballo here on the program a couple of times, and some of the discoveries he was telling us about were the remains of coca plant that had been found at Chaco Canyon. But yet again, the origin point seems to have been Mesoamerica, and so this clearly shows that there was quite a bit of trade occurring in the ancient world. And so we see that in North American archaeology. At one time, yet again, that was sort of a controversial proposition, but there is more and more evidence that supports it. We're now seeing that also at a lot of European sites, and I see, recent discoveries like this, and I think, well, that's fascinating, but it's not entirely unexpected, is it?
No, it's really not. And if you're aware of the trade networks, especially with the Hopewell culture in the Ohio Valley, I mean, you have obsidian coming from Wyoming, you have shells coming from the Gulf of Mexico, you have things coming from the East Coast, all over, and they're coming to a central location where they're being processed and traded out by the Hopewell. And so it wasn't much of a surprise for us who are really in the know here about North American archaeology. But nonetheless, we do see that these travel networks were in play, and whether they were actually traveling there personally to retrieve it or whether it was along a trade line of goods, is still controversial to some folks, but needless to say, the the items were still getting from point A to point B over vast amounts of distance.
Yeah, they really were. I tell you, it's exciting to see all these discoveries. And right here, guys, during Archaeology Month, which we always observe here on the Seven Ages Audio Journal, before we get into our interview about a very, very important site, and I think I speak on behalf of every team member here in saying this is one of our favorite sites, although I know that I've never been there. I don't think either of you have. I hope someday we'll be able to go there. I am talking about the famous Gault site. We've got quite an interview lined up for you. But first, Jason, why don't you tell us what's happening over there on Patreon with the Green Dragon Book Club, digging deeper and everything else, all the many enterprises that are currently underway.
As usual, we're still rolling out new episodes. We just posted a brand new Cross Time Pub. Got another one coming up here very soon, and also another edition of the Green Dragon Book Club. So if you're looking for that extra content, we do one episode a month, but if you want more in between, you can head over there to Patreon, sign up. We have 3 tiers for you to choose from, but we have lots of great content on all of them. And then with the holiday season just around the corner, we do have the Seven Ages merch shop, that's going to be found over on TeePublic. And you can find all of the links to these things in the show notes. You just click on the show notes there. Everything will be listed with links. You just click on those and follow them over there. We've got t-shirts, mugs, bags, koozies, whatever it is that you want. Just head on over to TeePublic, check out our shop, and we would greatly appreciate it with the holiday season coming.
For sure. Now, this is a bit of a holiday special, since again, we're celebrating Archaeology Month. And before we get into our interview, since I mentioned singing bushes and stones and things during the intro, I wasn't just completely hamming it up. I'm actually referring to the name of a new documentary, The Stones Are Speaking, and the director of that, Olive Talley, joins us. Jason, tell us just a little bit about this, and of course what this reveals about the site we were just talking about, Gault, one of our very favorite archaeological destinations.
So I had the opportunity to do this interview with Olive Talley. She is the director, the producer, and the writer, and this is her first real independent documentary film, and she has done an incredible job. She has a absolutely immaculate resume. She's worked all over the media, from major shows, television network shows, anything that you can imagine. She's got experience in. She was a news correspondent during Hurricane Katrina. And so she has a very extensive knowledge of how to produce things such as this film. And it's top notch. It tells the story of a much loved archaeologist, Mike Collins, and all of the intricate work and sacrifices that he and his family had to make in order to document and ultimately save the Gault site. So we have done an episode on Gault before. If anybody wants to hear that, it's with Clark Warnecke, who was there on the site at the time. He's now retired. That is episode 57 on the Gault site. So you can go back in our catalog and check that out. It has a preview of what you'll hear tonight, but the film is available now. It's on YouTube, it's on Amazon, various other places that you can find it. It is certainly worth your time. And I got to tell you, fellas, this is the best archaeology documentary that I have ever seen. It is engaging, it's emotional, and you'll be surprised. I think you really will be surprised at just how in-depth the story and the struggle to save Gault really and truly is.
I can't wait to hear more about it. So coming up next, Olive Talley, the director, writer, and producer of The Stones Are Speaking, about the legendary Gault site, right here on the Seven Ages Audio Journal.
Tonight on the Seven Ages Audio Journal, I welcome special guest Olive Talley. Olive is an award-winning producer, writer, reporter, and filmmaker. She brings a blend of small-town relatability and big-city sophistication to all of her endeavors. She grew up on a farm in Texas, but built her career working in some of the nation's largest and most influential cities, including Boston, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and New York City. She is a 3-time Emmy finalist, a Pulitzer Prize finalist in investigative reporting, and a winner of the George Polk DuPont Columbia Award for Hurricane Katrina news team coverage, something very dear to my heart, a national headliner for the Outstanding Network Documentary and Texas Headliner Awards, among others. Olive believes that character and integrity are essential factors to telling a story, and this is at the forefront of her latest documentary film, The Stones Are Speaking. Olive is the writer, producer, and director of this stunning film that tells the story of the Gault site, and more importantly, the story of archaeologist Mike Collins, who risked it all to save this enigmatic site deep in the heart of Texas. Olive, welcome to the 7 Ages Audio Journal.
Thank you. What a nice, warm introduction. I'm grateful for that. Thanks, Jason.
Well, I've got to tell you, Olive, this was such a treat for me to see this film. For years, I think everyone in the world of archaeology has longed for these type of productions, something that really highlights our interest in things that we're passionate about. And even from the trailer, I could tell this was going to be something unique, something special. The work that you put into it, the dedication, the production quality, everything about this film really speaks to the importance of the site. And of course, to Mike Collins, who is someone that we all admire and have for years and hold very dear to our hearts. So congratulations on the film.
Thank you so much. Truly, this film was a story of passion for me, and it was a labor of love for 5 years. So I'm just so grateful that you recognize the passion that I put into this. And like you said, Mike Collins is just such a peach of a fella, academically, scientifically, personally. He's a person who hooks you with his own passion and ignites and fuels the curiosity that you express about archaeology. You know, what can I say? I'm a huge fan of his, but as a former investigative reporter, at first I thought, is he a little bit, can I believe what I'm seeing? Is he as good as he appears to be? And is everything at the Gault site so incredible as they say? So I talked to a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of archaeologists around the United States and said, what's the worst thing you can tell me about Mike Collins? And the worst thing that they could say was, well, he can be a little disorganized sometimes in terms of paper and clutter on his desk, and he doesn't always publish as quickly as we'd like to see in academia. But boy, you can take his word and his science to the bank.
Yeah, and that's obviously the most important thing, and it's relayed so well through the film. You know, you really get to know Mike and his wife, Karen, another key part of this story, and we'll talk more about her as we get into it as well. But before we do that, I do want to recognize a couple of things about the film. First of all, we have some awards here. The official screening selection, the Archaeology Channel International Film Festival Audience Award winner for the Austin Film Festival 2024, official selection of the Austin Film Festival 2024, and then the official selection USA Film Festival 2025. And of course, we hope to see more awards coming in the future. So again, congratulations on that. Well earned. And I encourage everyone to get out, check this film out, support it. This is what we've been waiting for in the world of archaeology. And we know that everyone listening here on this show loves this content. And I can guarantee you that this film will leave you in awe. So before we get into more of those details, though, let's learn a little bit more about you, Olive. So someone who's had a career in the media, print, television, film, now online media. You've seen so many things, so many trends come throughout the years, but taking your skill set and applying it to something like this documentary film, give us a little bit of your background that helped you shape what this film would become.
Well, Jason, that's a big question. I think I can answer it. My whole career, I've been driven by a need and a desire to inform. And when I got into journalism, I'll reveal my age, in the 70s, when I was in college in 1974, I lucked into, at the urging of my English teacher from high school, into a journalism class. And I found what I thought was my calling. And that was to get information, talk to people. I love people. I enjoy talking, as you're going to probably hear on this podcast. And I saw this as a window to learn and to share and to educate others. So the common thread and the underlying theme of my career, my life, has been public service values. And that's what we as journalists were taught when I began to learn about the craft and the profession of journalism. We are here to gather information. We are here to convey factual information that is supported by 2 and 3 sources, not just rumor, not just hearsay, but you get the facts and you get them right and you source them and you cite your sources. Just like academicians do, just like researchers do, just like, accountants do. Document what you're saying. And you try not to make a mistake. And I believe most of my career, I was frightened every day when I went to work. I thought, oh my God, will I ever learn all these things that I need to know about tax rates and, civil rights and courts and all these things that I covered as a reporter. But in the end, it's all about asking questions, seeking the answers, listening to the answers, and then reporting them thoroughly. And so I applied, even though my journalism went from radio to wire services, United Press International, where I covered the space program and death row, to newspapers in Houston and Dallas, and then in television, as my print colleagues like to say and kid me and say, you sold out to TV. The commonality of it all was all about reporting and just trying to tell an accurate, good story so that people can get information and be informed to make good decisions. And the thing that was different about this indie film is that unlike all the rest of my career, I was working for an employer. I was working for a big company, a radio station, a newspaper, a network television. I had resources, I had people, I had experts and, lawyers and rights and clearances people and library researchers behind me. This film, as an indie filmmaker, I was on my own little high wire. I had to raise the money. I had to go out and get the information, and I didn't have anybody backing me up, and that was pretty scary, Jason. And but I had a fantastic team, professionals, editors, photographers, sound techs, other colleagues who had been producer colleagues of mine and writer colleagues who I asked to come in and read behind me and give me input. So I had help, but in the end, it was the burden and the pressure of it all came on my shoulders.
And Olive, there's something that I can't help but notice is The Stones Are Speaking is really centered on the life and work of Mike Collins and also the site. But just as Mike had to step out alone to attain the site, to preserve the site, you stepped out on your own to produce the film. And as a proud native Texan, I got to ask, your upbringing, your work ethic, that spirit of adventure, that drive to go and do such things as this, how did that relate to Mike's story, being a Texan yourself?
Well, Jason, you're very astute. Karen Collins, Mike's wife, has told me several times, Olive, you need to tell your story because you had challenges just like Mike. And I said, yeah, but I don't want to spend 30 years doing this. I hope that I can do in 5 years, at least. And I, of course, thought, I can do this in a couple of years. But anyway, it wound up taking 5. But yes, it has been a journey of challenges for me. And those challenges mirror, but do not in any way equate to the challenges that Mike faced in saving this site. Where does that drive come from? I think growing up on a farm, raising steers for the county fair, having a father who basically said, you are valuable based on your work. And you are judged by your work. No pressure there, right, Jason? I mean, so, but my mother taught me, and I think instilled confidence that you just do what you want to do. You pursue what you like. And if you are if you are doing work that you enjoy, that you feel purposeful about, then you will succeed. So just pursue your passions, whatever they may be. And in that regard, I think Mike Collins and I also share a similarity because he pursued his passions and he marched to a different drummer. He wasn't just a researcher, just an academician. He did field work, he did consulting work. So he had his foot in every aspect of archaeology. And he was fortunate enough that he had the financial means and support from his family to be able to pursue his career in a very unique way. And I feel like I've been lucky and fortunate throughout my career to be able to have one job that led to another, that led to another. And each job and each career change had these commonalities that I've discussed, but I just applied them in different ways. What drove me to do this project and to complete this project is because as a native Texan and as someone who had had a career largely rooted in Texas, I had never heard of the Gault site. And I was astounded and a little bit embarrassed that I hadn't known about this site. How could it have escaped me when I was reading newspapers all over the state for many decades and trying to be informed about all important things happening in the Lone Star State? And as I began to talk to other people, my circle of friends and even acquaintances, I would talk to people on the plane, or I'd sit in a doctor's office and say, "Hey, have you ever heard of this place in Central Texas called the Gault site?" And inevitably, few people had. And I could not fathom that we could have such an important place in archaeology, in history, in human history, right here in our own backyard, and most people didn't know about it. So I was just damn determined to make sure that somehow or another Texans became aware of the importance of the Gault site and how much it took Mike Collins to save this site for the benefit of all of us and for the education of us as human beings on the planet.
So eloquently put. And you talk about that in the director's statement about the public awareness, about the importance of saving these irreplaceable cultural sites that, again, so many people aren't aware of. Yet Gault has a fairly good infrastructure. I mean, they have the school there, the Gault School of Archaeological Research, the site itself. So many articles have been written about this enigmatic site. We've covered it on the 7Ages Audio Journal previously, episode 57, where we got to talk to one of your guests on the show, Clark Warner. Yeah, Clark Warneke. Yeah, great guy. At the time, he was the executive director of the Gault School of Archaeological Research. I believe he may have retired since then. But yeah, Clark was a wonderful person who was willing to sit down. And so it was great to see him. And also some of our other former guests, such as Bruce Bradley and Ashley Limpke, people who we've built relationships with, again, make appearances in this film. And I think that if I'm guessing, I would imagine that they wanted to contribute because of their love for Gault and also for Mike. Is that the case?
Oh, absolutely, Jason. Bruce Bradley, Tom Dillahay, Ashley, Clark, Tom Hester, all of these folks, John Lose, everybody. And that is what made the film so exciting to me and the work so, easier because everybody wanted to see it done and everybody was willing to kick in. Everybody gave their time. I don't know what the perception is out in the real world about how people think films get made or stories get told, but nobody who was involved in the interview process was paid a penny. We didn't pay for interviews, and it's considered very unethical to pay anyone to speak for a news story or anything else. So people donated, gave me their time willingly, spent hours on the phone with me answering my persistent, niggling little questions, and then appearing on camera. Dick Boisvert, for instance, had driven from New Hampshire to Colorado and was working on Bruce Bradley's Wallace Ruin site. So I went to Colorado to do the interview with both Bradley, Bruce, and Jill Patton, one of the longtime volunteers, and Dick Boisvert. So I was able to get all three of them in one location. But everybody was putting in skin in the game. I got to call out Charlie Locke. Charlie Locke is a journalist, but he by training was an archaeologist. And fortunately, Jason, he had videotaped at the Gault site in 1997 and in 1999 and 2000. So that footage that you saw in those timeframes, that was all of Charlie Locke's footage. And he had kept it all. And he had shot it on little mini DV tapes. And he had kept this big box of these tapes in his garage for 22 years. And I didn't know about him, but it was a word of mouth thing. And someone said, "Hey, have you ever talked to Charlie Locke?" "No." "Well, Charlie and I got together. He told me about all this, and I am salivating, because I needed that footage so desperately." And he gave all that footage to the project because he too wanted the story to be told, and he wanted the work that he had done so many years ago to also be valued and honored. And we've subsequently got all of those tapes in with the Texas Historical Commission and the Texas Archaeological Society, so those records will be preserved. And I digitized everything that pertained to the Gault site and contributed that to this new repository in this library, thanks to Jamie Ross and some other people there at THC and TAS. So again, it really was a collective effort. It was that same spirit that Mike drew the army of ants to the Gault site to help work as volunteers. All of those same people from New Hampshire, from Utah, from Florida, from Virginia, from Colorado, they all rallied behind me too. So I was so fortunate and so blessed by their generosity of time and support.
And again, those parallels can't be ignored. So the way that Mike preserved the site, the artifacts, the story, you have now been an intricate part of putting together the documentation, the actual physical, the film, the photographs, the audio, all of those portions that are now preserved for posterity and part of the story of Texas, which again, as we get into the Gault site, you're going to discover as a listener, if you're not familiar with this site, just how important and how rare this site truly is. It is unique in the history of North America. So let's talk a little bit about the site itself. Now, looking at it from the viewpoint today could probably be kind of unassuming, but just below that surface is a time capsule, if you will. So talk a little bit about why this site is so significant, not only to the history of Texas, but to the entire nation.
The Gault site was a game changer for what we thought we knew about the peopling of the Americas. And you have to dial your clock back a little bit, because I'm not speaking in terms of what we know today. I'm speaking in terms of what they knew at the time, back in the 90s, when Mike began first exploring this site. So it had been plundered and many of us would say looted by amateur collectors and hobbyists who were trying to find artifacts for sale or for putting them as a display on their wall. But that kind of collecting sometimes very well-meaning, is still a very destructive process, as we explain in the film. So when Mike went out there in 1991, because of all the collecting and the little honey holes or potholes that people dug to find these artifacts, he said it looked like a World War I minefield. But he was able, along with Tom Hester, to persuade the landowner, Elmer Lindsay, to let them do a test excavation for 12 days. And what he saw, he said, was, quote, off the charts. And he realized that the stratigraphy, which your audience will understand that term, really held a layer cake of this time capsule, as you described it. But he couldn't do more. He saw potential. He sized up the land. He saw the geography, as well as the stratigraphy underneath, of the layers of the dirt beneath your feet. And he realized there was something important here. But it took another 7 years after the land had changed hands for him to be called back by the then owners of the land, Doris and Howard Lindsay, and their son, Ricky, and his wife. And then he saw more Clovis artifacts than he had ever seen in his life. Now, the Gault site is important because over the course of the entire work that Mike did here, we learned new things about how people were living in this part of the country during Ice Age times. We learned that people were living here as much and as far back as 20,000 years ago, which helped strengthen the belief that people were here much earlier than scientists had believed, and followed the old paradigm of the Clovis theory, that people simply migrated from Northeast Asia across the frozen land bridge called Beringia, the Bering Strait, and then eventually migrated southward into the rest of the Western Hemisphere as a result of the ice sheets melting at the end of the glacial maximum. But we know from Monteverdi, Chile, and dates that came in earlier in 1997, where Mike, of course, did the lithics analysis on that for Tom Dillahay. And when you pull in the Gault site, and then more recently, when you pull in White Sands, and you've got 23,000 with, footprints of men, women, and children, in the sand, in the mud, that paradigm is no longer the prevailing paradigm. And so the Gault site contributed by telling us, and there were more Clovis, by the way, there are more Clovis artifacts that have been discovered and recovered at the Gault site than any other single site in North America. And so you've got major status as a Clovis site. You've got unusual engraved stones that some may believe, and Clark Wernicke is an advocate of calling it the first art in the Americas. I'm not sure that's the case, but it's certainly an intriguing thing. You had a mammoth jawbone recovered with Clovis tools all around it. And then you had this discovery of a culture or cultures that made their tools differently, and they were older than Clovis, according to OSL dating. So you've got a unique, as you said, layer cake of time represented at Gault that is very, very special.
And with the importance of the site, Mike obviously recognized that when he first got there, and he talks about that in great detail in the film, and you capture that moment so brilliantly, because this isn't just, again, a film about Gault. This is also the story of the struggle of Mike Collins. And Olive, I've got to tell you, when you're talking about his initial observations, his initial survey of the site, you can see the tension when he's retelling that story. To be in that position, to know that you're dealing with something that can literally change the history books. That's so vitally important because at the time it was being parsed out to collectors. It was being dug here, there, everywhere on the site. And he knew something had to be done, but you can see the burden on his shoulders. And I know what that feels like. I've been to sites that were slated for a housing development or sites that were going to be turned into commercial property. And that burden that you capture so well in the film is palpable. Watching it from my living room, I could feel the tension. And as you move forward with the story, Olive, I can literally take a deep breath. But that's one of the things I want to highlight about the film is this is not just the typical documentary in that we're just going to give you a bunch of facts and have a narrator. This is a story that is emotional. You will feel the tension. You will feel the relief. You will feel that triumph of, as we get to the end of the story, there's so much here that you collect. So I don't want to overlook the fact that, yes, the site itself is remarkable, but the story and the lessons that this film teaches are vitally important. So let's talk a little bit about some of the key characters, the landowners, Mike, his wife, Karen, and how they sacrificed their own lives, their own time, their own financial stability to ensure that this site in Texas was preserved for us to all learn from today. Talk a little bit about those characters and the development of the story.
Well, Jason, these are all remarkable people. Let's start with Mike and Karen. Opened the dictionary and looked up the word altruism or an altruist. You should see the faces of Karen and Mike Collins right there. They have devoted their lives to preserving history and sharing the history that they learn with others. Will come to the Gault site, but they've done this with an historic home that a log cabin that they correct me, a log house, a log home, and a farmstead that they have salvaged from demolition and then restored lovingly. And then Karen has truly done decades of research to document both the white ownership history of that farmstead, as well as the Black slave and later ownership of that farmstead. So the Moore Hancock home is a reflection of the history of the Republic of Texas at some very critical junctures for several decades and for generations. They have also donated the conservation rights to the Nature Conservancy, to their farm that they own outside of Austin near Liberty Hill. So they're protecting wildlife. And when you come to Gault, you viewers will see this if you watch the film, that Mike and Karen mortgaged their own personal property and put their own money on the line and even took out loans to be able to purchase this property to save it from development. And you don't meet people like this every day. And Tom Williams, one of the archaeologists who was on staff at GSAR for a while, he said, this story embodies the notion that you devote yourself to something that's bigger than yourself. And that is exactly what Mike and Karen have done in all of their years and efforts to save the Gault site. Now, Howard and Doris Lindsay are very interesting characters too. A lot of people are surprised that I have chosen not to paint them as villains for collecting and digging on their property to get artifacts. Mike did not see them as villains. Mike saw them as interested, curious, and engaged. And he drew on that and engaged them, and through education, helped them understand without criticizing and judging them, that what they were doing was, in fact, destroying history, and that this was an amazing and major site that needed preservation. So it was only through his attitude and he as Clark says in the film, he didn't come across as some, ivory tower scholar. He walks out there with his blue jeans and his suspenders, which he still wears today, and his hat and his cowboy boots, and he's just the most approachable, everyday, warm human being that you'd ever want to meet. And that's how he introduced himself to the Lindsays, and that's how they related to each other. And it was only through his own patience and understanding and ability to help educate them into understanding that he was able to persuade them to let him do the scientific lease that revealed the Clovis richness of the place. And then ultimately they worked with him and gave him a lot of time, 5 years, to try to figure out how to pay for that place and purchase it. So the Lindsays themselves, I feel, spoke very eloquently about their own motives and their passion, and they first thought they could maybe make some money by selling artifacts, but when they learned differently, they stopped. And so I let the Lindsays speak for themselves, and I think they do a very good job of that. And I personally know that they love this place and they love this site, and they now guard it and they protect it, and they want that they feel a part of helping make this history come alive. So I wanted to approach them the same way that Mike did, and I went in with an open mind and an open slate to just ask them questions. I didn't pull any punches. I asked all the right questions. I asked and I don't want that to come across as being egotistical. I asked all the questions that I thought needed to be asked, but I asked them in a civil, respectful, polite way, and they were candid and they were vulnerable, because I think another producer might have turned that and heightened that tension. You don't need any heightening. You don't need any revving up or sprucing up or, sensationalizing of the tensions that were there as you described, Jason. There was plenty of tension, and I just needed to lay it out the way it happened.
Olive, there's so many parts to this film that are just vitally important to archaeology as a whole. And not just the story, but so many lessons that are learned. I don't know that if anyone else would have been on that property other than Mike Collins, that this would be the end result.
I think you're right. I don't think there's a single other archaeologist that I've come across. Bruce Bradley might have been able to do it, but he wasn't in Texas. But so no, I think Mike was uniquely suited, uniquely qualified. He had the perfect combination of science smart, education smarts, teacher qualities, patience, and that charm and folksiness that just allows everybody to relate to him. If you're open and if you're willing to learn, you can't help but be drawn in to connection with Mike Collins. But if you're lazy or biased, or if you're not willing to do the work and do it honestly, you might see some of Mike Collins' intolerance. But it's just because, and Dick Boisvert said that in the film. He said, hey, as a student, you had to be right for the right reasons. You couldn't be right for the wrong reasons. And he made you prove your hypothesis and document it with data. And Mike has exacting standards, and his precision is, I think, reflected in his labeling of that material and the Gault assemblage as older than Clovis. A lot of people would say pre-Clovis. Well, he would say, well, no, we don't know if this directly led to Clovis. We don't know enough to be able to say that. So the only thing that we can clearly, precisely, accurately say is that these artifacts were made differently, and these artifacts appear in soil that dates older than Clovis. So it's, that's how precise he was.
Oh yeah, and you'll see in the film the meticulous nature of his excavations, of his documentation of all of the every single little individual piece, as it should be. And so his approach, his history with the land, again, I think Mike was really in the perfect position to be the one to save this site. And again, one of those important lessons, Olive, that I think everybody needs to recognize is, in addition to the archaeological story, additional to the story of Mike and Karen Collins, is the Lindsays. So here you have people at the time that are the landowners. They find something that strikes their interest in artifacts. There's a lot of them. So they become quickly, the wheels are turning. What can we do with this? What should we do with this? But, I found over the years in archaeology, so many times landowners, people who are initially collectors, they just don't know how to go about preserving a site. They don't know what they should do. And oftentimes they don't think the big picture of there may be something of importance. They just think, oh, artifacts. Well, that's cool. I can take that home and give one to the grandkids and all of these things. So the film really drives home the importance of the professional and the collector relationship.
Yes.
So
Yes.
many times a collector may have been in one area, one singular area their entire life, and maybe collected one farm field for 25, 35, 40 years. And when a professional comes in and can see someone who's collected all of those things from one area, that is invaluable information, especially once it gets tagged for a housing development or gets turned into a commercial property. You will never see the ability to go in there and excavate again. So oftentimes these collectors play a vital role, but with someone like Mike who comes in and patiently, as you said, patiently explains to them the importance, gets them involved with the process so that they now take ownership in that history, is another vital lesson that the Stones Are Speaking includes. So, as listeners, you have to watch this film. If you are a fan of this show, if you are someone, and we know you are, if you're listening to the show, you love archaeology, you cannot miss this film. There's so much that it captures, from personal relationships that we see within the world of archaeology to the story of Clovis, the story of those before Clovis, and then the human side of what it looks like when someone has the burden of trying to preserve a site as important as Gault. So with that being said, Olive, I want to talk a little bit about you as the creator. So you got the story, you know what the end goal is, but as you begin to develop and actually start the filming, what are some of the challenges as the director and the producer and the writer that you felt? Did you have pressure that you felt that you had to present the film in a certain way? What was the vision for the film?
Jason, the vision of the film started one way and ended up a different way. It constantly evolved because of the information that I was getting and the footage that I was receiving. From the outset, I knew that I wanted to tell 3 stories. I wanted to tell the story about what Gault is and why it's important. I wanted to tell the backstory that nobody had fully heard before about how Mike and Karen saved that site. And then I knew that I needed to have credibility. If I was going to have credibility with archaeologists, then I had to put all of that in context, and that I had to explain the Clovis theory and how this site contributed to new understanding about the peopling of the Americas and the timeline for that. And the challenge from the outset was, how the hell do you weave all of that together? And then there was a huge visual challenge because when I began, I had no footage. I only knew that there were field journals. I knew that there were photographs throughout all of the years of excavations. I knew that I could get people to talk on camera. I knew that the Gault School had also taped some video of their own in 2008 and 2009 through another production company in Austin. I knew that there were other stories, BBC, Nova, other, PBS, Alan Alda's American Scientific Frontiers, which we showed a little clip of. I knew those things existed, but I had no idea how expensive it would be to try to license all of that footage and the hoops that I was going to have to go through legally to secure licensing rights to air even news stories from local stations in Austin and in Central Texas. And again, you're talking about age of material. So there were challenges associated with working with VHS tapes and mini DV tapes when we were shooting in a 4K environment. So there were technical challenges, there were access challenges in terms of finding and locating source material. And then very soon after I began, there was the challenge of learning that Mike's memory was failing.
Yeah, as we move into the latter part of the film, the challenge of the documentation, the challenge of telling the story becomes all the more apparent when we learn that Mike has unfortunately been stricken with one of the worst, I think, diseases that anyone can experience, Alzheimer's, dementia, those type of things that rob one of their life's work. I mean, even President Reagan had fallen victim to this. So it really drives home the point, I think. And again, I told you at the beginning, listeners, that this would be an emotional documentary, and it truly is, because at the end, someone who has dedicated their heart, their soul, their life, their livelihood, and their time with their family, their time with their wife, fully to dedicate themselves to this site, in the end, may not remember their role. And so all of it makes your film, The Stones Are Speaking, that much more important to the story, because not only have you captured the information, documented it on film, but you are the only source that really compiles everything that tells the story of Mike Collins, so that his family can go back in the future and see his dedication, his drive, his ability to represent archaeology, academia in such a way that's so endearing. And so again, to me, this almost seems like a fated collaboration, if you will. Your work on the film, The Stones Are Speaking, and the life of Mike Collins mirror each other so similarly that the end result is this amazingly beautiful film that you've created. The narration is top-notch, the music, the shots, it's all there, folks. This is a immaculate documentary film. You have done an amazing job, and such a service to archaeology, Olive, because we need more of this. Because when you get people involved, when you have other people that know about sites like this, it creates a sense of community, and it creates a sense of ownership. And it's a way for everyone, it gives them ownership in these stories. So when I knew I was having you on as a guest, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to you and your team for putting together something that is so vitally important to the story of Texas, to history, and again, capturing Mike and Karen Collins' life, dedication, and your role in this is now part of that story. So thank you for that.
Thank you. You've already got me crying here now, but it I didn't know that I had no idea of Mike's dementia when we started the project, but it became apparent to me because I had interviewed him back in 2017, and he was really telling great stories. And few people, I don't think I've said this much, but I taped on audio all of those interviews in 2017. So some of the audio that you hear is audio from him that dates back to 2017. And when he was really at the top of his game in storytelling and all of that. So while I went into this hoping that Mike would tell his own story in his charming, captivating way, it became clear that he couldn't do it to the same degree, but we were able to tape enough with him quickly enough during COVID to secure enough that we could then draw back on prior interviews. And then that is when I felt like I had to pivot and I had to expand the story and I had to engage Tom Dillahay and Bruce Bradley and Ashley Lemke and others. I always intended to interview all of those people no matter what on camera, but the story shifted because I knew that we needed other voices to help come in and tell the story. So, I think it was fated. I don't know how these things work, but I'm so honored and I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity and to be able to share this story. And as you can tell, it means so much to me.
Absolutely. Well, again, the movie is The Stones Are Speaking. It is very highly rated. Folks, I can't say enough good things about it. Please go out there, support it. The world of archaeology needs this type of thing. We need more of this. We need attention on these sites. Again, I always encourage everyone, find the local sites, find sites that are near that you can go visit. So many times, we go out to these sites and there's literally no one there. It's been days since anyone's come. Learn about the history in their local area. Go out and support these sites and do your very best to get involved with volunteer opportunities, anything that you can do, because the story of the peopling of America is the story of all of the wonderful history that's come before us here in this country is part of who we are. So get out there and get involved. Olive, there's many places that people can see the film, but let's talk about online access. Where can people find out more information and what's the best place to view the film?
Well, Jason, first of all, let me put just one fine point very quickly on that. The story of Gault is all of our story. We all share in this story, and all of these archaeological sites, as you said, it's vital to save and preserve these sites because they tell us about who we are. Clark Wernicke loves to say, why do you think people go to ancestry.com? And we want to learn about our DNA. We want to know who we are, where we came from. And archaeology and anthropology helps tell that story. And it is the shared story of humans on planet Earth. Now, where can people watch? First of all, there are two ways to watch it. PBS, we premiered in broadcast on PBS in March. PBS would only allow a 56-minute version of the film. It's a good story, but it's not my favorite version of the story. My favorite version is the 85-minute, which is just shy of an hour and a half. And that is available for you to watch and rent, lease, buy, whatever, on demand on Amazon, Apple, Google, YouTube. You can go to our website, thestonesarespeaking.com, and we have direct links to get you to all of those sites if you wish to be able to watch the film. We also have some screenings coming up. We're going to be screening at the Bob Bullock State History Museum in Austin for the month of October for archaeology every weekend. And there is something different about watching this on the big screen than watching it on your computer or your phone or even your television at home. But however you watch it, we would just be honored that you take the time to hear this story. It's not about me. It's about you, and it's about history, and it's about all of us being able to come together and work together. And I think that's the other big takeaway, Jason, of the film. Look at what we as people can do when we act for the greater good, when we come together with a shared mission to accomplish something for the betterment of others. That, if nothing else, I hope people will take away from The Stones Are Speaking, because if you listen and if you work together and if you come together and work with others, there's a lot of good we can accomplish in this world. And gosh, we sure need that now in these divisive times.
Beautifully put. We've been speaking tonight with Olive Talley, the writer, producer, and director of The Stones Are Speaking. Olive, thank you so much for being here tonight on the 7 Ages Audio Journal.
What a delight, Jason. Thank you. And thank you to all your viewers for watching and listening. And just keep up that curiosity. That's what it's all about.
So again, I want to thank Olive Talley for being our guest tonight. This was a truly special episode for me. Again, get out there, support this film. We need more of this type of thing in the world of archaeology to be able to capture the story, the visuals, and all of the history to go along with these sites. The way that Olive Talley has done with this film is absolutely incredible, and I hope to see more of this in the future. So again, we thank Olive Talley for joining us here on the 7 Ages Audio Journal.
Absolutely. And again, the Gault site, long, fascinating, excellent books available about that. Jason, I know that you have some of those. I may have a couple of them somewhere myself. But the archaeology at Gault, again, a really good example of that whole motto to dig deeper, because again, at Gault, they continued to find more and more and more. And initially it was known to be a Clovis site. And then there ended up being some pre-Clovis archaeology. There were even some of what I guess in the southeast we would call red stones that were located there, but again, in different areas around the country. Those are known as gainies or by other names. There also were some instances where they began to find even more intriguing discoveries. And when they went further on down, they find essentially, as they're hitting, I believe, stone. That's how deep they go, and they are still finding some artifactual remains. They weren't even able to radiocarbon date some of those materials, but again, optically stimulated luminescence dating takes it back to around 20,000 years or more. And that, again, is tremendous. Now, that was also, yet again, very controversial around the time that those discoveries were made. But now we see the ignofossil human footprints at White Sands and multiple studies that now confirm their age. And this all, again, just in support of the ongoing pre-Clovis or earlier than Clovis discoveries throughout North America. So Gault really kind of led the charge in helping to push back. And they would never have known what actually existed there and how long there had been human occupation if they hadn't kept digging. So always dig deeper. You never know how far down you're going to go and what you might find.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, 20,000, 25,000 years ago, that was the height of the last glacial maximum. And I'm pretty well convinced there was a lot of very interesting things going on the planet in regards to humanity in those days.
Yeah. Again, we have so little indication that remains apart from stone artifacts. Those are the ones that generally are able to be preserved. Occasionally we have some ichnofossils, again, like footprints and things along those lines, or just fossil remains. And we, of course, also have petroglyphs and things along those lines. But, when it comes to basketry, that goes that far back? Very little. I mean, when it comes to anything that represents what kind of clothing would have been worn, any kind of perishable materials, technologies, and other things that these ancient people were using, we are very much still in the dark. But as always, again, with all these discoveries that we discussed this week, I'm hopeful we will continue to learn more. And that's one reason why we love talking about all this. So guys, let's do a little more talking, but off the mic, why don't we pony up over here at the Cross Time Pub for one more round before last call? What do you say?
Let's do it.
Well, then we shall. And on behalf of Jason Pentrell, James Waldo, and yours truly, Micah Hanks, we are bidding you adieu officially. Of course, in the meantime, check us out on Facebook. Join the conversation there on our Facebook page. You can also check us out on Patreon, get additional content. Check out the Green Dragon Book Club and the Digging Deeper supplemental podcast. As always, my friends, we are the 7 Ages Research Associates, and we'll catch you next time right here on the 7 Ages Audio Journal.